Thank you guys. What's going on? How you feeling today?
Good.
When I meet people on tour and stuff, one of the things I hear most often is, I'm surprised you're not more weird. I thought you were gonna be crazy. And then I'm like, well, first off, you don't know me that well. And second, that's kind of mean. Why do you think that? I think I'm gonna read, but then I went through my book thinking about trying to read new things that I haven't read before for these kind of events, and I found something. I was like, okay, maybe this is why some people think that. But before that, I want to say thank you to Penn for inviting me to do this. Thank you to Strand for hosting me. My book came out in October, so to be here, it's a big deal for me to be in this space, to get to, be like a real author or something. That's different for me. So yeah, I thought you were gonna be more weird. This story, I'm gonna read from the last story in the book. It's called Through the Flash, and I'm gonna read like a pretty violent section. And I thought I would do that because this book in general is pretty interested in violence, and what it means to be the recipient of violence, what violence does to the heart, the mind. And so I think this story is pretty specifically concerned with that. Also, I think it needs a little bit of setup because it kind of is crazy. It takes place in a world where this very specific sort of town is living the same day over and over again. And alongside that, some people are changing in that sort of loop. This one girl that we're going to be following, her name is Amma, and she sort of become super powered. She's super strong. And, in that sort of having that power, she's kind of become maybe the worst person ever. Those are her own words. And she's, was torturing people who had bullied her, and she became sort of a really kind of messed up person. And this section is, I think, one of the parts where she's sort of like proving just how fucked up she was. And I wanted to read it, and then maybe talk a little bit about it, then we could have me and Isaac will have a discussion. And this is from Through the Flash, and this is with a character named Amma. Imagine the worst thing anyone has ever done. I promise I've done it to everyone more than once. When I realized I was faster and stronger at first, I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe I was supposed to be on top now. I thought I was getting rewarded. And so I did what I wanted. Before the Flash, Carl was not nice to me. He liked to call me nappy-headed bitch or dumbass cunt. He liked to make me cry back when we still had school. Then, when my mother left us, he had said, guess your mother didn't want to be alive knowing she made you. Well, I know he regrets saying that. Because after the Flash, once I realized what I could do, I hunted him. He was the first person I ever killed. He was the first person I'd kill every day. The hurt I've pulled out of that boy could fill the universe twice over. And again, so like the days kind of come back every returning. So you get killed, you come back the next day. I'd rush over to his house and find different ways to ruin him. There is nothing I haven't done to Carl Samuels. I know well done Carl from medium rare Carl. I made sure his mother knew the difference too. Even made her choose a favorite. It was a good day for me when she admitted her preference. Tell me, Patricia, which do you prefer? I laughed. She was tied to the posts on the side of the stairs. I grabbed her cheeks. Her son's blood was crusting beneath my fingernails. I pulled her face down to the 2 strips of meat I'd cooked just a few minutes before. I fried the boy's arms in olive oil, even added salt, pepper, adobo. Carl was writhing and crying behind me, his arm severed and the wound cauterized. I didn't even have to tie him up. Hey, baby, you are supreme, and Miss Samuel started, and then I snapped one of her fingers. She screamed. By then, I was immune to the sound of human screaming. Or The thing I think others felt when they heard someone hurt, I felt the exact opposite. It was like music for me. The way people scream when they're just afraid versus when they know their life is going to end. The unrelenting, throaty sobs of a man makes when you dangle his life in front of him, the shouts a child makes when you remove their arm. The sharp harshness that comes from a mother who can't save her son and can't stop trying. But that day, Patricia Samuel swallowed up her scream and stared past me to her son. You are supreme. This is nothing. I love you, Carl. You are perfect. You are supreme. You are infinite. We are forever. Very sweet. Now tell me, Miss Samuel. I smiled and made my voice soft. Do you prefer the well done or the medium? Patricia Samuel wept as I turned my back to her. Please, Queen Amma, I beg you, please spare him today. Knife, Queen Amma, I corrected. If you tell me which you prefer, I may find some mercy for you. I took the knife out of my fanny pack. Please, Knife Queen, she wept, just as desperate as a person can be. I shook my head. Carl, your mother did this to you. And then I pressed my knee to his neck. It's not that hard to remove someone's eye. Carl screams, yippy and small, and then they grow. They're wordy and pathetic. Hey, okay. Like I was giving him a wedgie. Then they grow and pull and stretch. No. I love you, baby. It's okay, Miss Samuel said. Yeah, Carl, it's okay, I said, stabbing deeper, shucking the blade into the boy's skull, laughing at how easy it was. Carl was silent. His body shook. Please, Knife Queen, she screamed for her son. Which do you prefer? Amma, please. Medium or well done? So much misery in that room. Neither. You have to pick, I said, looking up at her, smiling with her boy and so much of his blood in my hands. In a second, there'll be a very rare option on that plate, I said. Baby, I promise, you have to pick, I repeated. It was like holding down a fresh caught fish. Mom, Carl screamed. Well done, she said finally. I stopped. Take another bite to make sure. She followed my command immediately, bending down, almost breaking her own arm to eat the meat with her mouth as her hands were tied to the post behind her. Well done, Knife Queen Amma. Good to know, I said. That's how you'll have your call tomorrow. Then I got up and left. I forced Carl and Patricia to live similar nightmares hundreds of times. What's surprising is how it never got easier for them. Carl was always terrified. His mother, always desperate, destroyed, and ready to be destroyed for him. And maybe I'll stop there for now.
Ooh, all right, man. I'm so excited about this.
Weird, and I'm like, okay, I see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you read that aloud, I was wondering if you wanted to revisit that question.
Yeah, when people say that, sometimes I'm like, what do you mean? Like, for me, it's all, I'm like, it's all about like love and, perseverance in the face of like harshness. But there is some real harshness, and for me, like, I wanted to read that because, I added that. I actually, that wasn't in the original draft. I think I woke up in the middle of the night one time and like wrote that on my phone because I had the idea of it. And again, for me, like as a writer, I think why? If that's going to be in this book, why? And where that happens, where it's situated in the story, I think it's essential because we hear a lot of Amma saying, I used to be pretty bad. I used to be a bad person, and now I'm trying to be better. I want to be better. And I think, for the writer, you try to prove that. I want to prove, what does bad mean to you? And she's like, just as the worst thing you can think of. And I could say you're bad. I could say that generally. Here we have a scene where it's like, no, I'm worse than bad. I'm evil incarnate, right? And I think that's important for me to have, because I want for the reader to like, now how do we feel about this person who is trying to change in this space that, you know, that where you can't sort of, because it's easy to write off, oh, she was pretty bad before, but now she's doing better. No, she was this kind of bad before, and she's trying to change and do something different. I think forcing, and so situating that violence, like what does violence really mean on the page, and like presenting it, even briefly, but still presenting it, felt important for this story. And I think from story to story, you know, you sort of pick your spots and try to be intentional with it. But you know, for me, that scene was, I had to be there because she's kind of gone all the way to the end of evil. She's been to the darkest place, and I think for the reader, it's like, do we think that that's a place where people can be redeemed, you know? And you know, and I think that there's something important that can happen if you decide that she can be redeemed. Also, I think it's important that this mother character, you know, she says like, you know, you're supreme, you're infinite, you're supreme and infinite. And later on, you know, in Amba's life now, that's like kind of her catchphrase. That's what something she says to people to try to like get them to not be like her. And so I think maybe again, like having a in-scene moment where love doesn't die even in the most harshest of circumstances felt purposeful for me.
Even as it happens over and over and over again. I want to be very clear about one thing, though, before we really get into this. I did not say that you seemed normal. I'm not that person. That is a quote that has come up, but I just want to be clear. I had you pegged not as normal since the second I met you.
Right. Right.
But I do want to say, like, it's talking about that time after time again, a lot of these stories, there is science fiction, there is fantasy, and that's where I really want to start this conversation with you, which is like genre walls and why they don't fucking matter.
Right.
Why don't they fucking matter to you?
I like that phrasing of the question. They don't matter to me because I don't think of them when I'm writing a story. You know, I think genre is cool because maybe it's like a heads up to people who have like a established disposition to enjoy, I don't know, space or something. But for me, like, it's not, they don't matter because to me stories don't happen on the premise level, really. Stories happen where characters are forced to do just the hard things, you know, where characters are forced to make decisions. And whether that's in a Lowe's, you know, shipment truck, or in a town that's everyone's sort of undying because time is looping, you know, I think it's just a situation where, you know, that characters have to exist and try to survive despite whatever, you know, the obstacles that emerge. So for me, the genre is often very connected to premise, and to me, premise is just a kind of a way into the story, but it isn't where the story really happens. And I think, you know, genre sort of privileges that stuff. And I think there is a lot of fun in making a brand new world. You know, I think that's exciting. But I think that you're making a brand new world, even if you're creating a story that is set in something like a familiar reality. You know.
A familiar reality, like retail.
Yeah.
You know, just there's so many different subject matters that I want to tackle, including violence, and I want to get back to that. But when it comes to retail, to the mundane, to malls, what about that? Because it is, you had the entire universe, you had your entire imagination, you had your entire imagination of imagined universes at your disposal. Why center some of these stories in a mall?
Yeah, so there's like 3 stories that use the mall space pretty closely. It's kind of, you know, people talk about that write what you know thing, and I remember I was in Syracuse, and my housemate, one of my best friends in the program, he was an Afghanistan, Iraq war veteran. He'd seen the whole world, you know, twice over, and you know, he would write about it, and you know, I would think about like, you know, that's what he had seen, and like, what have I seen? And I was like, you know, the Palisades Mall, you know. I've done mad tours in the Palisades Mall.
Selling pole face.
But I mean, like if you worked retail, you know, I worked retail a lot, and for me that is what I knew, and I think again, like that advice is, you know, you take it with a grain of salt because you have no choice really but to write what you know. But what you know can become so many different things again. So like with in retail, sometimes it's familiar. Sometimes the shoppers are sort of zombie-ish. I think, you're a writer. You have your imagination. You can add life to whatever it is you are living. If you feel pain, if you feel joy, you probably have something worth saying. I just told that to a student in Syracuse the other day. She was like, "My life is boring. I don't feel like I have anything to write." But then like a couple sentences later, she was talking about, I'm a very sad girl. Meaning that she feels like she's emo. And I was like, well, you have feeling. Somebody else has feelings like yours. So, make something out of it. So for me, the mall, I worked there from pretty much 16 to a little after I was finished in college. I worked in the same store all through college. They let me sort of transfer back and forth against all odds. In the Palisades Mall and the Crossgates Mall in Albany, where I went to school. So yeah.
Can I ask what the store was?
It's called Against All Odds. That wasn't me saying a phrase. I can't make that up. I'm my mom, I swear. It's called Against All Odds. It's there still.
And so with that as a setting, is that where you start? Do you start with that setting? Do you start with the idea of what Friday Black or Black Friday can turn people into?
Yeah. So the first story I wrote in that space, or the first of the ones that's in this book, is the one called In Retail, and I think it was sort of just dealing with the sort of really, really intense monotony of being in the mall, and also kind of being afraid, like I was at the time, that maybe you're going to be stuck there, that maybe this is what the rest of your life is going to be, which for me wasn't what I wanted, which it might be fine, but for me that wasn't ideal. And so I wrote a story that was concerned with that, and then also it was interested in maybe the different ways, despite itself almost, there's humanity in the mall space, getting to speak to a stranger and kind of making something like a connection with them, So I think that was the first one I had written. But in college, I wrote a bunch because I just didn't, just trying to make meaning out of this place that I knew well, that I also hated a lot.
One of the things congrats, you did it. One of the things that you did so incredibly well in those moments to me was talking about salesmanship, talking about kind of how you notice the little things and how you play to or against whoever you're selling to, right?
Right,
At one point trying to be I know I have to say this jacket doesn't look good.
Yeah.
Before, how do you think that helped you as a writer?
I think I know it did, but also I think it might be that I had already sort of become accustomed to a sort of way of looking in the world that helped me be a salesperson actually. So Maz Sharif, the poet, she says poetry is a way of looking at the world or reading the world, and her first book is called Look, and I think kind of a part of the job of a writer or maybe an artist in general is to pay attention. I've been telling my students that a lot, pay attention, really notice something, really look at anything, and that's sort of a, you could find a poem. The example she used a grocery list. Looking at something really closely, which in turn sort of becomes something infusing it with love almost, and I think. Manifesting that connection, that willingness to look at anything or anyone really closely is a part of salesmanship. And I mean, it's sort of a false, sort of maybe bastardized version because you're doing it to sort of manipulate them. But also I think it's, in maybe its best version, you really are listening to their concerns and trying to see what it is that they hope to be or have or feel like, and seeing if you could bridge that gap in whatever way that may be artificial or not, but with the ways that you do have available to you. So, I think, but also I think in the store, you do get good at specific sort of noticings. It really is, there really are people who maybe, rather than look at the mirror, they look at their significant other, to see how they look, how they care about it, as opposed to decide if they're going to buy something or not. You do get pretty good at kind of figuring out the hierarchical structure of this trip, because that's who you're just going to pay attention to. You get rewarded for it because your sales are high or whatever. So yeah, it does. I think me wanting to be a writer, or at least me kind of being interested in paying attention, already helped me with my sales stuff. But then I think being a salesperson actually in practice, it eventually helped me be a better writer too.
And did the want to be a writer come first? How long have you been writing this collection?
Often I say like 26 years pretty much, but the oldest story in this book, which I think is that in retail story, is like probably 6 years old now, a little bit more than that. But I started writing before I knew like I could be a writer. I had never been around writers before. I didn't know that was a thing that regular people could do or be. And so I think me and my friends, we kind of just kept up stories orally, just like, so we had like these like sort of series, almost like anime-esque type stories. And then eventually I took like some of my dad's legal pads and just like started writing like some story on my own. And just because it was fun to me, I liked the feeling of making something, of seeing it physically on a piece of paper. I was trying to, it's like you always have something to do kind of if you're working on a story. So even before when I got to college, I met Lynn Tillman and I started being like, for real, I'm going to try to do this. I want to do this now. But before that, I was sort of interested in just like the possibility of like making stories and seeing what that was.
Were there writers or books or any other form of medium really that you were reading or looking to as you were coming up that kind of influenced or encouraged you to try and write the stories that you write now?
Yeah, I'm sure it's everything kind of, right? But I know for sure, because when people talk about the genre thing, I think like I think maybe globally people are obsessed with genre, but I think this sort of hierarchy where realism is at the top is sort of a Western thing, And I think because I was so into sort of the manga anime thing early on, I was already prepared for, what might be strange conceits or weird situations to be vehicles for serious stories. Oh, this guy finds a notebook. If you write your name in it, you die. That's the premise, And that's just normal. That's a very serious thing that I like. This guy's whatever. I could think a million of them. But anyways, so for me, I was sort of trained early on to think like, whatever you want the story to do, you make it do. Not worrying about feeling you have to be just, representing life as it is or something or all these other things. And also I didn't grow up super literary, whatever that means. And so I didn't have like this canon of people I thought I had to try to be like to become serious. I had that later on, post MFA, post like sort of college, I sort of started to receive that, but I didn't come up in that, and I feel pretty lucky about that actually.
If I was to ask, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I am, what does your canon look like?
Is it like a bad answer to like reject even the concept of canons? Like, is that bad?
Ooh, no. Now you're putting it back on me, and I like it. The touche.
I'll put you on the spot.
Touche.
Why do you believe in a canon?
My eye now in the knife. I get it.
No, I thought you were gonna be weird. No, I thought I think I think that the canon can be so much more than it is now. I think. For me, and some people that are in the canon I think that there's so many people doing so many dope things all the time that I don't really look at it like that. I don't try to find. Toni Morrison's Toni Morrison, but I don't. And that's not to say I don't have a lot of people for me that like are like the people I sort of like come up under, and like I feel like I'm in conversation with and change, make me think about work in a different kind of way. But I think, I can sort of suggest a standardization that I think is not super helpful for art making, and I think everybody, I have my like Mount Rushmore or whatever, or my top five, or someone else might have their top five, and that's great. Or and even again, like even that is like has become way more fluid for me. I do have writers that I love and whose work is important to me, but every day someone new comes, or I discover someone who's been here the whole time, and so I'm just into like whoever's saying something cool, and I try to stay open that way.
An interchangeable canon,
yeah.
And with no idea maybe of a canon. Let's talk satire real quick. You do it so well. It's
Thanks.
so incredible. But for me, especially sometimes when I'm reading incredibly sharp satire, I feel like characters get flattened.
Right. Yeah.
You have managed to keep characters fully whole while, again, writing incredibly sharp satire. How do you keep your levels balanced?
That's a really good question. I like that question because I feel like that's
Better
like a
than the canon question?
No, that can. I didn't think that was bad, Dad. I thought it was like, all right. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. I like, for me, I think there's a lot of different answers. Well, I think there's a lot of different things. But for me, like, what I think is the satirical sort of, the heavy satirical element will usually come from like institutional presence as opposed to a character that we're dealing with themselves. If that makes sense. The person who's sort of like one-dimensional and obviously sort of like messed up, it will be the teacher in this school that sort of makes us think about this space in a certain way, as opposed to maybe in like if I'm talking about the era, the character like Ben himself, right? And so he himself will have a little bit more depth, and sometimes the problem, often for my stories actually, the problem will be his inability to adhere closely enough to this sort of almost, that this system that we now are reading as satirical and like maybe speaking to like some other problems of society or whatever. He maybe can't do it well enough, and that's going to cause a problem for him. So that's one example of it. And if you want to talk about the Finkelstein 5 again with Ben, like he can do the thing where he's changing his number on the scale, but his inner thoughts, the way he thinks about the world, he has a lot of depth, and I think it even suggests like that scale is sort of ridiculous. If you think about what he's actually doing, he kind of understands that. The courtroom, for example, on the other side, maybe specifically the defense attorney of this sort of Zimmerman type character is extremely kind of over the top, but again, that's not a character that we're like with super closely and directly. And so for me, that's kind of usually I think what happens. But again, it's sort of case by case. But I think it's going to be characters who I think are close to reasonable in systems that are unreasonably either violent, unreasonably harsh and toxic, trying to survive. And that, I think for me, that's usually how the stories that are sort of satirical kind of work.
And find their depth. The fact of the matter is that racism in the world and in this country and in this society is over the top.
Right.
So it maybe doesn't feel that out of place. That said, you make, while I was reading the stories, for me, I just love them so much, but there's so many moments that are so loud.
Yeah.
That are so loud. And the 5 children, the way in which they die, how do you walk up to that line? Where do you know where you found the right level of loudness?
Just revision, hardcore revision. I'm big on revision. That's like a George thing. He's hardcore about that. But in the case of the Finkelstein 5, it sort of was never going to be like on screen having them getting murdered, so to speak. That would just never be for me. But even the way we talk about it in the story, going line by line, what do I think about that? Why is that line here? Really making every single sentence feel justified. And yeah, it really depends story to story, but I do sort of have, and it grows and it accrues, but it's sort of a general, not a general, but like a feeling about like why a story might be doing something, and if it's whatever it might be, how direct it is about a subject or how violent it is, how do I keep it purposeful? I try to be just very intentional, and that happens through just case by case, vigilant revision that comes from working with whether it's my agent and my editor, they're working with them as well, getting other people's or maybe just general people's eyes on it. Yeah, but having something in your mind where like you're trying to do something purposeful, and there is like a pitfall. I talk about this. Roger Reeves, the poet, he has a talk on YouTube called "The Work of Art in the Age of Charleston, Ferguson, and Baltimore," and he talks specifically about how, as an artist, you can maybe not knowing that you're doing this, recreate the violence you mean to dismantle, and how you might sort of not do that. And there's a lot of, he talks about some specific things you might try to do, and one of the things is being self-implication is important, and I try to do that when I can, and different things like just to be sort of knowing that you're doing something important, and it is, if you are being violent or whatever, you may be, it can potentially do harm, so how can you keep yourself sort of really just on the ball on every single line.
And just for those maybe that don't know exactly, can you just describe what that the death of those 5 kids are, and like how would you say that you did what you saw in that YouTube video? Like how do you believe you accomplished it? So
in the Finkelstein 5, the first story in this book, 5 young black children are murdered via chainsaw, and so it's like that's obviously a horrific thing that happens. So how do I make that violence that happens in this story world not pornographic and sort of pointless, or at least for me not pointless, and how do I not just recreate this violence that is very real in our world? Like I said before, one thing is that that murder isn't unseen, So again, like there's a certain amount of trauma that happens in just this perpetual recreation of violence, physically, just seeing it. And he talks about that in that talk actually with like sharing, and how like murders go viral, and how you could just perform the spectacle of going viral for the sake of itself, as opposed to really meaningfully contributing to a conversation. So that's one thing, trying not to do that. Which is different, again, though, from maybe that last story I just read, where that is something we do have a kind of in-scene kind of violence. So, but with the Finkelstein 5, that's one thing. There's also like the way the conversation happens, sort of, for me, regarding that violence is sort of like usually the characters who administer violence, I kind of let them have like a fair shake too, actually, In that story, it's kind of a little different, kind of like he's sort of a monster, because I'm sort of speaking more specifically to those of us who have to over and over again hear how human the murderers of black people are, but never and while that's happening, have these young black people post their deaths be dehumanized because they once did something bad or something, whatever it might be, bad in quotes, or literally because of what they were wearing. I remember Geraldo Rivera being like, well, he was wearing a hoodie, talking in regards to Trayvon Martin. So in that story, there's like that's like some of the things that I try to do. And again, if I went, there's like line by line sort of considerations, especially with that story actually, of trying to make it feel like I'm doing this thing purposefully and intentionally, but also not shying away from the reality of it. Because for me, part of the problem that is connected to the project of that story is we have people being murdered so much, and it's becoming like sort of like normal because it's a gun. And again, I've said this before as well. When you kill someone with a gun or with a chainsaw, they're dead either way. And so they're just as dead either way. And so part of that is me saying like, what does it have to take for you to be outraged?
And again, that's like I'm drawn to it, right? Because then we have a conversation about it, 5,000%. You tackle so many issues. You also do satire so well. It's also just goddamn funny. There's a lot of humor in this book. How is that something that you wanted to incorporate, that you felt like was needed? How did you hone your skills as a humor writer?
Thanks. I don't know, like I said, like I read George, and I think part of why I like George Saunders' work.
Thank you. I was like, you keep saying George. Let's say.
Part of the reason I like George, we're really good friends, so I call him George. The part of the reason I like George Saunders' work is because he's funny, and I heard something. Trevor Noah came to Syracuse recently, and he said this, and so I'm just kind of stealing it now. He said, humor is a way of reminding myself that I'm still me on the other side of whatever obstacle I'm facing. And for me, humor is a way of moving through the world, just kind of like Will looking closely is a way of moving through the world. It's a way to sort of remind myself, like, yeah, is that crazy? That is crazy. You know, that is absurd. And I think it doesn't take too much work sometimes with the things I'm talking about. Sometimes it's just a very slight removal of euphemism, and all of a sudden this thing that we've come to accept is really seems hilarious. Sometimes it is a little bit more of a top, but I don't know. I think the humor thing is hard, and I lean on it a lot. Because for me it's like an issue of engagement. I like my work to be entertaining. I like it to be engaging, and I think it's sort of a just figuring out what is absurd. You know, and making fun of that, and especially so maybe like it's like a punching up thing as opposed to like sort of punching down. Being sort of frank about absurdity that's all around us, and I think sometimes even that, just like, oh wait, that is weird that guy got trampled, and that's kind of a normal thing, is sometimes that's like where the humor comes from, and then sometimes the punchline is like, actually it's not that funny. Yeah. You know, so kind of just trying to find different lanes to make myself be okay with the story. Actually,
you see those videos of people just like running over other human beings, and it's just like there's humor to be found there. There's also literally people running over human beings to save money, and not that much money.
Right, and it's a real thing, you know. And again, I think there's so many examples of a lot of like really awful things that are just sort of, that's just it, and it doesn't have to be. And I think poking on those, if you poke them even a little bit actually on the page, they start getting kind of silly.
Yeah, and people also laugh when they feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Which I think is something that you do very well, which is like make the reader feel a little uncomfortable.
I make people feel uncomfortable, yeah. I thought you were going to be weird.
I thought you were going to be weird. The other thing that I really feel like you capture so well in these stories is family, relationships. What was it like? Of course, I'm thinking of the father in the hospital, but there's just so many interactions between family members. How do you make we've already talked about depth but kind of make these personal relationships work, especially sometimes in such short stories? Like I'm thinking of the mother said 2 pages, right? Like, basically tell us all your secrets. This one.
You know, I mean, again, it's sort of case by case, but I think with the family stuff and the relationship things, it's sort of presenting action, you know. So again, like like not to be like a teacher mode, but sometimes I do this thing with my students about characterization, you know, and how do you like get someone to understand this character. And so you could describe them physically, which is important, I think, just because it's hard for our brains to hold like a philosophical ideal or an idea about anything without like sort of a vessel. And so image making, not only visual but sensory in general, image making I think makes it easier for people to like hold ideas about anything. You could just say things about someone through like this sort of exposition, and also you could like have them do specific things, and in that doing of specific things, you sort of get to know someone well. And in things my mother said, for example, it's sort of just like a close telling of a specific situation that starts off with like, here's these things my mother said that really quickly give you a broad stroke picture, right? So it's like it's kind of exposition, but it's told in the side of the language, and that is like particular to a very specific person. So again, you're kind of getting this double work. I don't know if this is too like crafty or whatever. And so like, those like sentences, my mother's favorite thing to say to me is, I am not your friend, right? So that's sort of like exposition, but it's also, it's a very specific thing to say. And like, so you have an idea about someone, you have like those 1, 2, 3, 4, or however many times, you have like a broad idea of who this person is, which then we have this very specific thing that happens. And that, I think for me, in like the energy of that thing that happens, rubbing against that sort of exposition via statements, that rubbing creates like a fire that equals you feeling about either of these people now, for me. And then so you can do it a lot, but like you need that action. Even if the action again is off scene, you kind of have to like recreate it in your mind as the character is. But having characters doing specific things or not doing things you really, really wish they would have done. You know, like maybe in like it's like more the case in like The Lion and the Spider. You know, just setting up stakes through those kind of avenues of like maybe telling us what the situation is, and giving characters the opportunity to either do or not do like that really essential thing. For me, that creates that sort of connection, and you can like play with that in different ways.
And that's where you find the friction, the tension, the story, as it were. One last question before, and I'm going to open it up to the audience because I don't want to just like hog all this genius to myself. I feel like you guys will probably have some wonderful questions too. But in the story with the father, there's the 12-tongued God.
Yeah.
Could you, for those that haven't read that story, just maybe explain the concept of the character? And as I read that, I just feel privileged that I get to ask, like, what does that God mean to you?
I almost read from that story. There's a character in the story called the Hospital Where. It's called the 12-Tongued God, and sort of like a muse type character, but it's not like the sort of like, I don't know, Tooth Fairy style muse that just comes and like sprinkles magic and you're talented now. It's like a very kind of mean, sort of condescending, kind of like asshole guy that is also like sort of very powerful and very specific. And like, you know, and he's called 12-Tongued because like he has a bunch of masks and a bunch of faces. And the way in my mind when I read it, actually, like every other word is like a different inflection. So if he says like, you know, you are not ready, it's like, you are not ready. I've done it once before. It's like really hard.
Did you read your audiobook?
I didn't.
Damn.
Right. Anyways, so he's that kind of guy, and for me it's about that sort of relationship between trying to make art and also like the pressure you can put on yourself to be successful in anything. I think for a long time, especially like as I was getting older, writing was kind of like, in some ways, like my therapist, but also like maybe the reason I needed therapy a little bit, you know? And there's like a weird tension, you know, when you really, really, really want to get something good at something and you really, really try really hard and you know you're not good yet, you know, and your taste outweighs your talent by a lot. And that's like a weird space, especially again, because, you know, you have that sort of more general capitalistic kind of like feeling like I'm not adequate because I don't have this much money or this much accolades or whatever. And so the 12-Tongue is like a sort of physical manifestation of all that sort of weird writer energy thing.
Do you feel a want to give in? Do you feel like that is a voice that still speaks to you? Do you feel like you've beaten it?
It's changed a lot. It's different. I think I might like that. Like, I don't usually talk about like what I'm going to do next, but I think there'll be another story with that thing, and it'll be a different number now, though. Maybe because I'm contractually obligated to not use the other one anymore. But like, but also because I think
just saw your agent.
My agency's there. She's like, yep. I think it's gonna be like 33 probably instead. 33 tongue God or 22 tongue God. And in the story, he'll reference that fact that, you know,
I used to have a different name.
And then we sold it to...
But you signed contracts.
You sold it to whatever. Meta. But yeah, it's like that kind of... He's that kind of character that is all about like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm different now for sure. Especially on this side of the whole, I don't know, now that I'm talking in Strand, I realize that in writing, the joy kind of comes from like doing it, not from... It's cool to go to the events like when you know everybody's eating tartare or whatever, but
what is tartare to you?
Oh yeah, backstage we were talking. Tartare is like mozzarella sticks for rich people, you know.
Ooh, that was good.
You know, these literary events, they always have they're very fancy and they always have tartare at them, and I don't love tartare, and
no mozzarella sticks.
I think mozzarella sticks are better.
I am right there.
But anyways, but yeah, now on this side of it, I kind of know that there's a lot of, I don't know, the success thing. It's just it's cool to be like just doing your work, making something that you can be proud of. It's nice to be acknowledged, but it isn't everything. And so I think back then I was very concerned with like sort of feeling valid for I wanted validation, and now I know that, and I tell this to my students a lot, as much as I can. Like, you can't wait for someone else to tell you you deserve to be happy, you deserve to be like, you're whatever, anything. If you're writing, you're a writer, and then keep doing that, and then the rest of it is sort of just so they can throw their galas or whatever.
Yeah, none of the validation.
Still invite me to the galas, though.
Yeah. He's like, I don't hate tartar, but
I just don't love it.
The validation doesn't get rid of that monster. It just maybe makes it change.
And it can make it worse if you adhere to it. Like on the other side of it too, it gets dangerous on the other side. If you start believing it just because that people are telling you you're like the shit all the time, that's bad too. Because then when they stop telling you that, then what happens?
You love tartar and you hate mozzarella sticks. All right, let's open it up. Questions from the audience.
You raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you both of you being out here.
Thank you.
And so you mentioned a lot of things that I wanted to put into one question basically, and this is gonna be a little crafty. Cool. You were mentioning, so right now I feel like in terms of you have Friday Black, you got like Jamel, you have Nafisa Thompson, you have Alexia authors, and I feel like a lot of collections of stories are not just.
We all took a picture together at one in where was it, Miami. It felt like important.
Yeah, and so I feel like it's not just like things are being critically like acclaimed and stuff, but it's like people are like buying these. There's a New York Times like bestseller, and so I'm thinking of. When you're writing your process, it's not like a novel where you have room to meander, right? And I feel like the short story has the possibility to be as close to perfect as you can get it. And so you were speaking about revision, you talked about like you were sleeping and you're like, I gotta jot this down. At what point do you feel like, all right, I'm gonna let this short story go? And also, do you have a process when you're in revision that you like a formulation that you do when you are revising? Like, is like I'm gonna look at this story and write it from beginning to end again, or is like today I'm gonna talk about dialogue, today I'm talking about structure, because each story in here has such a different structure. I want to know like how you process that.
Well, yeah, each story. I think that's a great question. Each story has its own needs its own sort of treatment, if that makes sense. But I do a lot of like crazy things, depending on how I'm feeling at the time. Like I'll do I'll read it backwards, literally, sentence to sentence, like a sentence like focus thing. When I get closer to being done, like when I was getting closer towards like feeling like I needed to have the manuscript done right before I sent it to Meredith Major the first time, like I go through each of them and ask them like questions. Each story, I'll ask them a question, like, why do you think you're funny? I don't think you're that funny, or or something like that. I'll go through that and try to see like where's your heart is kind of what I'm always like what are you about? And I'll go through the stories and ask them that. I also cut a lot because I do feel that sort of like not that meander thing, or like not feeling like you should like really keep the essential. I cut a lot. That's like I really feel good about making things shorter if I can. And like creating this feeling of the tip of the iceberg. Like for the stories that are in this book, I try to like know a lot more about the world of the story than it appears in the story, ideally. And like and it can mean so much. It might mean I draw out the Zimmerland, like what it looks like physically in my head, even though that doesn't matter necessarily for what appears in the story, but for me it does. So there's a lot of different like things. I think a lot of different tricks I might try to do. The real one is for me like. When I say revision, like try to get to see it again, like really revise it, like get to like revisit it. So it often just involves like letting it sit and coming back, and letting it sit and coming back. And then for me specifically, actually, before all this book stuff, sending it to someone, getting rejected, being very resentful, using that energy to stay up late night, to go in on it again and again, sending it out again, getting rejected again, getting more resentment energy, back and forth like that. Resentment is my answer. Just a lot of stuff, not resentment.
Also, as we're walking the mic out, I do just want to put one disclaimer on, which is like no comments, guys. Let's keep it to questions. I forgot to say that. That was a great question.
Real quick, Kwame, though the book was dope. I just want to say that.
Damn it!
You can't put chains on him.
I just wanted to ask: was it a conscious decision what stories come in what order?
Yes.
And I only say that because the later stories are really violent. The early ones are like in shock, like, in bursts.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you started a violent, people were like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely intentional, the order. And I think, and I could talk about the first three specifically, but I spent a lot of time with the order, and I have a method for that too that I got from Mary Carr. I put the story title on an index card, and then I put I have other methods, but this is one of them. Then I put the first line of the first story and the last line of that same story on an index card, so I can switch them around like that. So if you were reading it sequentially, you could see. I like the Finkelstein 5 being the first story because my mindset is sort of if you read one thing of mine, I'd like it to be that, because maybe you only get one thing. Also, it is, even though there's maybe a lot of violence towards the end, that's also pretty intense. So it's kind of if you can ride this ride, you might be all right through this book. Then the second story is really short. I don't want to use the phrase palate cleanser because that seems like it's a throwaway, and it's maybe my favorite story, but it's a lot quieter story as in reference to relative to that first one. It starts, my mother's favorite thing to say to me was, "I am not your friend." It ends, "I hope you can be proud of me." And then the next story, I really like the transition between "I hope you can be proud of me" and the era starts, "Suck one and die." So I like that kind of thing, and I do that all the way through. And so I really tried to make it sort of a track list that flows all the way through, because going from manuscript to book to me was really doing that, making it feel like something that accumulates purposefully all the way through.
Do you think, could you do that for every story, your first line and your last line off the top of your head? Do you think you could? Also, the last line, so many great lines, of course, but the last lines of Mother Said was...
I probably could, but I don't want to try because I'm afraid if I can't.
Real quick.
I could do it for sure for those first three easily.
Do you think as the book it's become so popular, would you maybe drop different orders? Maybe there's
put out order, you should read it in this order.
Yeah.
That order.
If you like the book the second time, read it in this order.
Buy it again and do it this way. Oh, wait, right here.
In the concept you were talking about in the beginning of redemption.
Yeah,
redemption, and what does that mean right now in this context, and what is your responsibility as an author who is trying to tackle redemption and forgiveness? Where does it all fit?
I think I'm kind of what you just said, that's kind of what I'm saying. What is our responsibility as people to sort of feel humans can either or be redeemed or not. What is our response? Where do we feel is are there lines that you don't that can never be brought back from? What does it mean to be a good person even? What does it mean to be a bad person? So I think the story for me is kind of, again, not to too much do the thing I did before. I think it's kind of asking that question. I know I as an individual don't have a specific answer about what is where the lines of morality are drawn, and I think we're always trying to figure that out. But I think the trying to do that work is important, and so I being willing to think about that kind of concept seriously, I think is important. And I think the book, and I think a story kind of asks you to sort of confer with it on a high level about that issue and see what kind of comes up, as opposed to telling you maybe this is what the answer is, So for me, that's kind of where I think about it, maybe.
Today?
Yeah, today. Tomorrow this is the answer. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
I feel like we're Twitter friends, so hey.
Hey. What's your Twitter name?
La Belle Verite.
Oh, yeah.
So my question is about the Finkelstein 5.
Yeah.
I read it sort of as an extension of Guitar's mission in Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you did too, if that was just me.
What's crazy? I somehow didn't have it in my mind specifically, but I know it had to have been the 7 days. You're talking about, there's yeah, I'm sure was in my brain on some level. I didn't explicitly try to pay homage, but it had to have been because I love that book and it's important for me. So, but I didn't because people brought that up to me before, and I was whoa, but I'm sure it was kind of there even if it wasn't explicit? That's a great question.
And we've got time for one last more, but I'm going to turn it into two by sneaking in real quick. You did talk earlier about who you see the book in conversation with, and I just think that was a great question. So are there other, I'm not trying to have you big up yourself here in front of everyone, but who were you in conversation with?
What I meant is who
were you in conversation with while you were writing?
The people who I were reading really closely when I kind of got into this place. That book, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, that's something. I'm not saying she's where she is. George Saunders is, for me, definitely, especially Pastoralia, the Pastoralia story. ZZ Packer, Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. Those Dennis Johnson, Jesus' Son. Those are some of the things that I think I'm really, that were hitting me. But I think I'm in conversation with who people you were talking, like Nafisa Thompson Spires. I think right now, I think that's maybe people I'm in conversation with, maybe Jamel as well. Jamel Brinkley. We're just talking first name with everybody.
One last question.
Here we go. I would just like to know what are you reading and kind of what do you recommend to read or write yourself out for?
I'm in teacher mode, so there's a lot of things that I'm trying to think of something newish. Well, it's new. I had never read Jhumpa Lahiri, Interpreter of Maladies, and I'm reading it now. I'm like, wow, that's great. You guys were right, That's really good. I taught 2 stories from that for the first time ever. It was awesome, and I haven't done that for a while. I'm reading Chanel Benz. Am I supposed to say that even if I'm going to blurb it? Probably. I am reading it. It's good.
It's all right. What happens in the Strand stays in the Strand.
I'll say that, and I'm not just saying that she's Q's mob. She's Syracuse too, but it really is good. So Chanel Benz is Gone Dead. People should buy that book and read it. C.J. Hauser's Family of Origin is another one I'm reading now too. Before it came out, it's coming out soonish. So those are people I think. But again, the people I said before, Jesus' Son, Pastoralia, beautiful books. Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, incredible book. Heads of the Colored People by Nafisa Thompson Spires. That was a cool amount. Some people nodded, and I said that. Everybody nodded, yeah. I teach that book too. She's the real deal. That's one of my favorite books of this past year. That she's really good. But there's a bunch of people. R.O. Kwan, The Incendiaries. There's a lot of good great authors. Tommy Orange, they're there. So those are some. Thank you.
And Friday Black. Ladies and gentlemen, come on, give it up for Nana.
Thank you, guys.